Welcome to Segundo Ruiz Belvis. We're very excited to be here again. You could call this kind of like our formal opening of Segundo Ruiz Belvis after the pandemic, even though it's still an online event. We're very excited to be back and full force. Our youth were spending time here recently, and this is the 50th anniversary year of Segundo Ruiz Belvis, so we're going to be announcing a lot of great things, but we're very excited to have this conversation as part of an event that has been historic for Segundo Ruiz Belvis, the celebration of the abolition of slavery in Puerto Rico. And we went to the young people that are working in the Afro-Boricua community, and we wanted to give them a space to speak about the subjects that are dear to their heart. And this is one of the subjects that we felt was very important to touch on. We have a lot of members of the Lucumí community in Chicago and people that are very much involved with music. So we feel that this is a special opportunity to discuss and to have young people that are involved in Lucumí speaking about their experiences. And I'm gonna be very brief in that part. But I do want to talk to you about, of course, our moderator today, Xavier Luis Burgos, is a writer, educator from Chicago, and somebody that has been, of course, involved in the community for some years. And we have, of course, many other people that are involved, but I'm going to let him read the bios of our panelists. Burgos is also the founder and editor of La Respuesta magazine, the first online publication devoted to the Puerto Rican diaspora, and of course, an abolition in the Lucumí religion. So thank you for being with us today. And I'm gonna leave it with Xavi Burgos and our guest panelists to speak about this subject. And of course, we're gonna be later giving you an opportunity to ask questions, which we think is very important. So feel free to write comments. We are both on Facebook and YouTube, so whatever you prefer, you can go to the SRBCC channel on YouTube, or you can watch on Facebook. And we're gonna be, at the end of the program, towards more into the hour of the program, we're gonna give everybody the opportunity, as much as we can, with people that are interested in asking questions or being involved in some way, trying to make it interactive. So thank you for being here. This is being broadcast live from Segundo Ruiz Belvis Cultural Center.
Been invited to speak on this topic. This topic is dear to my heart. There's so little research done on Lucumí and Puerto Ricans' involvement in Lucumí, and in particular in Chicago. And so before I introduce our panelists today, whom I'm very grateful for them to accept an invitation to speak about their experiences, I have an introduction, because many people do not know about Lucumí, or better known as Santeria. There's a lot of stigma regarding this religion and these spiritual traditions, as there exists much stigma regarding African spiritualities in the Americas and in diaspora. So the first thing I want to say is we believe in one God or source in Lucumí. We revere our ancestors and respect the dead. We worship Orisha, or divinities, created by God to assist us in reaching our destiny. We communicate with them where they live, in nature and the world around us. The Orisha gave the Yoruba peoples of West Africa technologies to facilitate a direct relationship with them. How to use these technologies are the secrets learned and taught by priests in this religion, preserved by communities that have survived enslavement and still continues to struggle to survive segregation, exile, and racism. It actually seems that with the passing of time, the more things remain the same. Lucumí is better known as Santeria because the Orisha were camouflaged with Catholic saints, even synchronizing some elements of Christianity. As Professor Strongman describes in his book, Queering Black Atlantic Religions, Lucumí, alongside Voodoo and Candomblé and other African religions, are probably one of the most African things preserved in the Americas. In essence, it is an Afro-diasporic expression of culture identity, and the divine. At first glance, the title of today's dialogue, Negro Divino, Black Divinity, or the Black Divine, may seem to be an oxymoron because we live in a white supremacist world of which anti-Blackness and anti-indigeneity serve as principal pillars. In this world, the color Black is not automatically equated with goodness, beauty, and God. A multitude of African cultures, societies, and peoples were blanketed with the term Black and dehumanized as a mass of other. It was Afro-descendants in the Americas who transformed this pejorative into one of pride and divinity, resisting projects to eradicate the most sacred elements of the civilizations they came from in Africa, Negro Divino. With that being said, it is without question that Lucumí is an Afro-Cuban religion. Some say it is embedded in the Cuban culture of the people. Without our spiritual ancestors, kidnapped to Cuba, and the determination of their descendants to keep these traditions alive, there'd be no Lucumí as we know it today. It is important to note that Orisha worship also survived and transformed in other places in this hemisphere, synchronizing with the spiritualities of indigenous peoples and other enslaved peoples from Africa and migrants and colonists from Europe and other parts of the Caribbean. This includes Candomblé in Brazil and Shango Baptist in Trinidad and Tobago. This cultural exchange and adaptations continued with migratory island hopping and then leaps to the United States, where especially Cubans and Puerto Ricans encountered each other, such as in the cigar factories of Florida and New York. There's a saying amongst Cubans and Puerto Ricans, de un pájaro, los dos alas. These words were penned in a poem by Laura Rodriguez de Tio, a 19th century Puerto Rican pro-independence activist living in exile in Cuba. She also wrote the original anthem of Puerto Rico, La Borinqueña. It was the Borinquen chapter of the Cuban Revolutionary Party which sought the independence of both nations from Spain that adopted the current Puerto Rican flag we all fly today. As you can see, the flag design is the same as Cuba's, with the colors inverted to display solidarity between both peoples. It is extremely important to note that this adoption took place in New York City, in diaspora, by exiles from both countries. Also important to note, but too often left out, was that one of the adoptees was Arturo Alfonso Schomburg, a Black Boricua, an intellectual of the Harlem Renaissance, mentor to many African-American writers and scholars, and whose archive is one of the most extensive and prestigious in Black studies, preserved at today in Harlem, the Schomburg Center. I don't believe one can understand the strong bonds between Puerto Ricans and Cubans without these histories of migration, exile, and political destiny, nor the reasons there are so much cultural exchange between Puerto Ricans and Cubans, and particularly of each group's Afro-diasporic cultures. There's so little research done on Orisha worship in Puerto Rico, of what survived and didn't survive organically on the islands during the transatlantic genocide. It is without question, at least to me, that elements from many African cultures are dominant in Puerto Rican cultures, from the way we speak and gesture to food and the many arts. It is without question, at least to everyone on this panel today, that there are visible Afrodescendientes in Puerto Rico and Puerto Rican communities in diaspora, and a Black consciousness, as demonstrated by the example of Schomburg. There's also a frustration amongst Afro-Boricuas and a racist dynamic that exists amongst Puerto Ricans. The tacit acknowledgement of our Blackness, while also the stigmatization, marginalization, and erasure of Afrodescendientes. This is one of the reasons why Schomburg left the independence movement. Cuba, which has historically had more Black peoples, both statistically and proportionate to the population, was ripe for more possibilities for the preservation of African cultures. These are some of the reasons why I believe there is a visible embrace of Afro-Cuban cultural elements by Afro-Boricuas who see in Afro-Cuban spiritualities the missing puzzle piece of what we've already been able to preserve from Africa in our communities in Puerto Rico and diaspora. We can see this in my favorite form of trans-Caribbean Afro-diasporic synchronization, la música de salsa. We have Black Boricua musicians like Ismael Rivera catchphrasing Ekwahe, which is a Lucumí spiritual saying, I present to you the Orisha, and Ruth Fernandez, El alma de Puerto Rico hecho en canción, singing a song to the Orisha Oshun. To add another intersection of Afro-diaspora and cross-pollination, Oshun is a divinity continually popularized by Beyonce and increasingly embraced by African-American communities alongside Puerto Ricans, Mexicans, and other peoples from south of the United States. And it is Oshun who remains today the divinity of Cuba, synchronized with the official patron, La Virgen de la Caridad del Cobre. I don't believe we can fully understand Lucumí without looking into all these histories and contexts. Nor can we understand what we seek to do today, the 140th anniversary of the abolition of slavery in Puerto Rico. You can read about the jubilation in San Juan on this day, written by the preeminent Cuban patriot José Martí in the Cuban Revolutionary Party newspaper Patria, by the way, the Black Boricua Sotero Figueroa served as his managing editor. It is too often cited that Puerto Rico's enslaved population was small in comparison to the rest of the Caribbean, that many Black Boricuas are also descendants of free peoples of color and Black migrants from other parts of the Caribbean, many of whom were fleeing enslavement from the plantation concentration camp systems. This is all true, but listen carefully how and when people invoke these points. What is the agenda behind this narrative of events? Why aren't we accentuating more the horrendously difficult lives of 30,000 people who on this day were freed from slavery and transitioned into a society that still defines Black as ugly, subhuman, and evil? Of extreme wealth inequality where Afro-descendants are ensured a place at one of its extremes. And yes, of racial mixture, and yes, sometimes ambivalence towards skin color. We can't deny that, but it also can't be the answer to every question. What does a society built on indigenous and African genocide affect how all Puerto Ricans see themselves, especially Afrodescendientes, and other Black peoples? How we organize ourselves in relationships and housing, on our current collective projects, initiatives, and institutions. Is there healing from these pasts, or just convenient forgetfulness? How are Afrodescendiente Boricuas responding to erasure and continuing to transform the traditions of their ancestors and the cross-pollination that defines the Caribbean and its diasporas? How is Lucumí a living tradition amongst Boricuas, and in Chicago, a city of many great migrations, political struggles, and spiritual dynamics? We hope to provide you a humble look into some of these topics in a dialogue with two incredible members of Chicago's Puerto Rican communities, experts in their own experiences, with different journeys towards and with Lucumí, and of different ranks, because this religion is based on eldership, commitments, and ceremonial rites of passage. And so with that, I'd like to introduce the panel we have today. We'll read their bios. First, we have my padrino, who I love and respect. Quincy Rags Babalorisha Ewin Saleh is a Lucumí priest of Owatala since 2009. He has been a cultural worker preserving and promoting consciousness of various art forms of the African diaspora for 15 years in Chicago. He is a proud active member of a few Chicago-based cultural centers and groups which promote Afro-Cuban religious and secular music, bomba, capoeira, and plena, and everything in between. We also have virtually Melissa DuPrey. Melissa is a multidisciplinary artist, community organizer, and spiritualist. She recently launched the Good Grief Project, an extension of the social justice component from a play, Good Grief, where communities of color are connected to local, accessible, and multidisciplinary mental and spiritual wellness practitioners of color. As a musician and an active member of her community, she is dedicated to the preservation of Puerto Rican culture by way of the folkloric music Bomba y Plena with Afro-Caribe and Las Bompleneras. She is currently an ensemble member at Urban Theater Company and artistic associate at Sideshow Theater. Melissa's film credits include Sherry, 2020, Two in the Bush, 2017, The Way We Speak in 2014, and Bromance in 2014. TV credits include recurring appearances on Grey's Anatomy, so check her out, and Empire on Fox, The Resident on Fox, Chicago PD, and The Shy, which is on Showtime. So we have two esteemed members, as I mentioned, Chicago's Puerto Rican communities, devotees to the Orishas, and we're going to hear from their humble experiences today. And so the dialogue, I got some questions, so I hope you enjoy. And then, as Omar mentioned earlier, there'll be opportunity to ask questions as well. So the first question is to Quincy. What does it mean to be a priest in Lucumí? And what exactly is initiation?
All right. Hello, everybody. Yeah, so to answer that question without spilling too many beans, priesthood in the Orisha tradition, there's a ceremony that one has to go through when they're ready to take that next step. At least I'll speak from the Lucumí tradition because that's the tradition that I practice. There's usually steps that people take when they first come into the religion. They get their guardian Orisha determined and probably get their set of warriors and their eleques or their spiritual necklaces. That officially makes them part of a house, of a religious house or ile. Then once, they kind of like get their first steps in the spiritual tradition and they, feel that they're ready to take the next big step, then they do cariocha, which is it's a 7-day ceremony where the yawo or the person that is going through a ceremony becomes a spouse or a bride of the Orisha. So it's kind of like a spiritual marriage in a sense. There's it's an ultimate sacrifice. You have to dress in white for a year and 7 days. You have to avoid, going out and, doing certain things that maybe you enjoyed doing before. There's a lot of things that go into that, but that's pretty much is what entails. It's about bridging the relationship between the individual and the Orisha together more closer. So you spend a lot of time at home, either praying or, reading about, your Orisha and the signs that you receive, from the ceremony that you do. It's a beautiful thing. Some people, they can't, hardly wait until their year's over, but it's like once you're in the last month, you're like, damn, time flew really fast.
Well, thank you for that. I mean, I bet many times folks in community think that traditions that are not officialized, right? We have obviously huge religions like Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, but many indigenous religions are usually talked about as if, you just go to 1 or 2 steps, or like it's something that anyone can just walk into, and then like you're a priest like mañana and everything's good. But the way I hear you describe it is like there's a process, and there's like things that have been preserved by people,
right?
And that is a system in place, right? What exactly, like, why did you become a priest in this religion?
So yeah, like I was saying, there's a process behind it. And so like, I guess my official calling of it was in 2000 and I want to say 5 or 6 when my uncle was murdered on Valentine's Day. It kind of shook my family a little bit, but I had to conduct business as normal because, I was like back then at Harold Washington College, I was like the president of various student clubs and I had a lot of responsibilities to do. So I was on my way, I was riding in Humboldt Park to get something, and then I stopped in a Botanica and I was like, let me just buy a candle for his spirit. you know. And then I saw this red and white beaded necklace, and I got it. I don't know why. Maybe the connection to Valentine's Day stood out for me. Um, but I got it, and so not knowing really what it was. About a week or so later, I was at this bookstore that doesn't exist anymore called Transitions. And so I was looking in the cookbook section because I love to cook, and so I saw this book like in the wrong shelf in the cookbook section called Shango, the thunder god of the Yoruba people, and I was like, what is this doing here? So I'm like flipping through it, and I'm like reading about Yoruba people, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. And I get to one page, and I'm like, oh, his followers in Nigeria wear red and white beaded necklaces, and I'm like, what? That was like kind of like my first trip out. Like, whoa, okay, this is very, very interesting. What's happening? So I got that book. I got some other books, and then I started meeting other people in the religion. I also had a teacher who gave me a CD that she thought that would be interesting to me. It turned out to be Orisha music. And so that was like the first time that I heard the bata drums that we, use in the Lucumi community. And, I just kind of like fell in love with the music aspect of it as well. And then, I was meeting various people along my way who were going through that process. And it just intrigued me, both the individual aspect of the religion and also the communal aspect of the religion. And I was looking for something to be a part of at that point in my life. And Lucumi just called out to me.
Thank you for that. So Melissa, I don't see you, but I can hear you. You there?
Yes.
I hear you giggling.
Yes.
Okay, so let me ask you the question. I hope you're having fun where you're at and being safe. What is an APTB? Because that's your rank, I believe. And what drew you to this religion?
Yes, well, first of all, hello, and thank you so much for inviting me to the panel. I know that there has been so many exciting conversations. I particularly am humbled to be here as a new initiate. I initiated in 2016, received my mano de fa and Nico fa, mano de arula. And I am an apetemi as of now, because I am not yet fully crowned. I'm halfway there. I also did my ceremonia for my eleques, and I continue to be inspired, and I know that I'm a baby in this religion and a student, but my experience has been one of learning, and apetemi essentially is a wife of Orula, and we essentially all start off as a petebi, but it's really as a place of service where you are preparing meals, you're preparing for ceremony, you're doing everything to support the house, the babalaos, the santeros and santeras in the religion, in the space, in the ile. You're doing everything possible to learn and support and lift the passages and the journeys and the ceremonies for other people to come through as well. In that whole time, you are at as many possible events as possible, so that way you can learn all of the food, the cooking, the recipes, what goes where. It's a very, very specific religion and practice where if you do something wrong there, it could have ramifications. If you put a different kind of food for a particular orisha that does not eat that, there are ramifications. So it's very specific, and you work directly with your madrina or padrino in that house, and you learn from them. And it's really by practice. As you were saying, Savi, there's not a lot of documentation. I mean, there's a lot of research. There's not a lot of documentation where you can just go and Google what you need to learn as an apatebi. There's a lot of forums that you could read. I am particularly a fan of Doctora Marta Morena Vega, who speaks at length at this as a professor, as an icon in the diaspora, as a Black Latina, as a Black Puerto Rican woman. She speaks constantly about what this religion means. And so there's a lot of resources at our disposal, but my direct learning comes from my padrino, my madrina, who will tell me exactly how to do certain things, and also knowing that every ile runs differently. So on top of all of the specifics of the religion, houses run specifically with customs and traditions. And that might not be wrong. There's, what I've been finding is that certain things might be contradictory, but then it turns out to be a rule of the house. So my job is to learn as much as I can, and also to be an example of my ile in my home, my spiritual home.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback on that. Like, I'm glad you touched on that. That not every ile is the same. Because like your position right now is up at the B. And so this green and yellow bracelet that I have, otherwise known as the Mano de Orula, it comes from the branch of our faith called Ifa, right? And so at least the way we do it in our house, Ifa and Lucumi go hand in hand. It's like, both sides of the coin for us. And so, like you said, historically in Cuba, because during the slave trade, babalaos and egungun priests, or the priests that worked specifically rituals of the dead, they were left behind. And so, they were kind of secluded for a very long time. And so there are houses historically that don't necessarily work with babalaos. However, there are some houses that, kind of like officially welcomed them in and said, okay, well, if you guys go through our ceremonies as well, and yeah, you can do Ifa after, and yeah, we'll work, hand in hand together. And so I'm happy also to come from a house that, works both.
Yes. And there's also many positions to have. I was surprised to learn that I could be an alache, which is like the main cook of a lot of religious ceremonies. So I love to cook. I am a DuPrey. I am a descendant of Emma DuPrey de Sterling. I was at first kind of just a little curious as to how a woman in this religion can go through a path that didn't seem so I'm not going to say sexist. I thought that there were very clear gender roles, that only women can do this and only men can do this. Women can never be babalaos. And I would ask questions. It was like, well, what can I do? How can I elevate, or how can I enrich myself? Or are there roles that I can go into that I serve a purpose and a function? And an alache is basically the head of the kitchen. And what's really beautiful is that the alache is, che comes from our hands. So everything I cook, everything I bless, is directly served to everyone that's participating. So I thought that was a really cool thing to do, besides, just doing dishes and cleaning up. Like apetebis, we stay up at the bees for a minute, but that's also the service. It's really humbling. And as a performer, I could want to be a diva all day long, but being up at the bee has been the most privileged role in my life. So that way I can really learn humility and service and receive the blessings from Orula and the babalaos and my padrino.
Yeah.
And thank you for that, Melissa. I mean, that demonstrates perfectly for me, and I hope it demonstrates for our audience, again, the complexity, the diversity of roles, the ritual, the ranks that exist. Because, I mean, as I mentioned, and we're going to talk more about, I mean, these traditions survive enslavement, survive segregation, stigmatization. So in order to keep a religion alive in all of these aspects, again, like you mentioned, from food to ceremonial preparation, to division of responsibilities and roles, I mean, like a house, every member of the house has a certain element of devotion towards a task, right? Because we got to do everything. We got to make sure everything is there. So even with all that work and stress sometimes, I mean, so what keeps you, Melissa, to it? What keeps you in these roles? What keeps you to this religion and to Arilet, because you're also my god sister?
Yes. I have to say I come from such a wonderful house. I echo Quincy, is that I found this, it found me as well. I was searching for a community, a home. I was searching for a place that felt like family. Before I initiated, I would receive readings, and it would continue to tell me I'm compatible with this religion. I would later learn through misas that I have a long lineage connected to this religion and espiritismo. I stay in it because the ritual is the science behind my belief. The ritual is the practice. The ritual is grounding work. If I do nothing else, I'm doing this ritual weekly, if not daily, if not hourly. There is ritual behind it. And I think that practice, especially now in these times, are really grounding and they provide for us a particular sense of methodology that says this plus this plus this, this is your road, this is a camino. And the ritual and the community and the love, I've never felt more secure. And what keeps me coming back is the community, the strong sense of community, and the idea that I can call upon my madrina, my padrino, and say, this is what's happening in my life. And they'll tell me, do this, make sure this has happened. It's all about the light and love and wanting your well-being. And so I feel safe, and I feel like this practice keeps me in alignment, and I learn how to have the tools for my own healing, right? If I'm alone in the world, or if I'm out away from my ile, I have learned the tools to keep me healthy, happy, sane, and always in servitude of our ancestors and the Orishas.
Thank you. So Quincy, I want to ask, for those who may ask you, well, why preserve a religion that came from enslaved people? Why preserve a religion based historically in Africa as one of the sources, here in diaspora, here in Chicago of all places, right? Why?
Wow, that's a loaded question. I think for me, having different backgrounds as far as like the religion, and also, being a person of very clear, visible African descent, and practitioner of various art forms that were handed down by our ancestors of various places, from Puerto Rico, Cuba, Dominican Republic, Brazil, you name it. I think it's important because these traditions, whether it's religious or secular music, they have stories of enslavement, but not necessarily of enslavement, but of empowerment. They have stories of struggle, resistance, and how certain ancestors got over these struggles. And it's just something that resonates with me in my soul whenever I'm feeling down, to hear how some of our ancestors endured certain things and how they hid certain things to preserve it longer. It gives me a little more so of hope to not, to learn how to kind of overcome some of the struggles and things that might be presented to me, nowadays.
I also want to ask, like we provided some histories, right?
Mm-hmm.
Africa, the Caribbean, diasporas in the Americas and in this country, right? And obviously, like I mentioned, without Cuba, there'd be no Lucumi. So that's without a doubt, right? Just like with salsa, right? But Puerto Ricans offer points of transformation, right? Points of connection, and add new sazon to it, right? And so there are folks, and there's conversations now, should Lucumí be only accessible to Afrodescendientes or to Black folks? Is a religion for everybody?
Another loaded question. The Orishas themselves, they're kind of, I don't want to say void of human problems, but these things that we go through here on Earth are human conditions that us humans put on other humans, or that other humans put upon us. You know what I mean? And so the Orishas honestly could care less if you're purple, if you're yellow, if you're brown, black, white, as long as your heart is there. But also, one also has to have humility for the roots of the people that preserved this for hundreds of years. It isn't where a free-for-all where you can pick and choose certain traits that you like and then just throw the rest away just because you don't identify with the Yoruba people. In a way, it's like you are kind of assimilating and adapting to certain traditions that have been passed down for many, many years. And it's just a sign of a respect for the elders that pass these traditions on. Like there's a saying, "Ikulobi ocha," the dead are the ones that birthed Orisha.
Mm.
And so,
Mhm.
we literally stand on the shoulder of our elders, of our egun, of our ancestors of blood and stone that contributed to these religions, and we carry their teachings.
Mm. And I think that's so important, Palino, because especially now with the internet, right, and especially with stigma, there comes misinformation, and with the misinformation, you have questions of what exactly were the traditions preserved by the people who survived all of these horrific things and persevered, and adapted, right, and transformed. Again, that's the thing about Lucumi and many African spiritual traditions in the Caribbean and the Americas, is that it's preservation, there's also transformation, and that happens organically. But with misinformation, there's also obviously people get into traps, they get into, they think they're in Lucumi, or they think they're following these traditions, and actually there's charlatanes. And that's the reality, right? That exists in every religion, right? And that's one of the reasons I think it's so important for dialogues like these to happen, to give the truth, at least from our perspective and from our Yile and our commitments, right?
Savi,
Yeah.
can I jump in
Claro.
on this
Claro.
real quick? Only to continue to highlight and center that this is an African-based religion, and yes, there's so much out there. It is inviting, literally, our spirit, who we are right now. Even if like white people wanted to be involved in this religion, let's say like we're seeing a lot of white people like completely immerse themselves into the religion. We're also understanding that this vessel is just a vessel, right? We are a physical embodiment of an emotional and spiritual state of being. We do want to center the religion. So I think that we can also keep in mind how we're moving in this religion. If this vessel has a particular denotation, like we're centering Blackness in this, we're centering the Orisha, but we're centering the practice, we're centering our Egun. And this religion didn't start post-slavery. It got transformed, right? It's transmuted and adapted based off of the resources and what was available to people at the time. So coconuts, cascarilla, all of these elements, these tools that we use now, like if we are looking at the actual Yoruba religion and the practices of Ifa, we'll see so many adaptations that have come through. So really thinking about how in this moment these traditions have also evolved over time, all these adaptations. Somebody might look at us and be like, y'all are practicing, where did you learn how to practice it? We don't use this, we don't use that, And so I think that we want to keep an open mind as we move through this, that we're centering the core values and the core principles of this religion in all senses of its forms. And yeah, we always start with the dead, right? We always start with our Egun and our ancestors and then move to the Orishas. But I think it's beautiful that a lot of people feel called to it, because we don't know who those people might have been the lifetime before, 2 lifetimes before, 3 lifetimes before. So I think it's very interesting.
No, thank you, and that leads into the next question. That's for you, Melissa.
My game.
Yeah. No, so what is an espiritista? Because you mentioned that earlier, and I've heard Puerto Rico described as la isla del espíritu, right? De los espíritus, right? And espiritismo is something Puerto Ricans have historically very much embraced. And that's something that is a separate tradition from Lucumí, but is integrated in particular ways because, as Quincy mentioned, without the dead, without our ancestors, there'd be no Orisha, right? We need the permission of our ancestors for the Orisha to engage with us in that particular way. And so what is an espiritista, and why revere the dead besides what we talked about already? Like, why revere our ancestors and those who have passed?
Yeah, so thank you for bringing in some context at the beginning where you were talking about how Cuba has Lucumí and we definitely have Espiritismo, dos alas de la misma pájaro. Espiritismo and Lucumí go very well hand in hand. They're super compatible because we have mediumship. So Espiritismo has been on the island in Puerto Rico specifically for many, many generations, and through colonization and also forced transference of religion, Christianity then became forced upon our people a lot of times. And my family, I come from a long line of people who practice Mesa Blanca. And Mesa Blanca is part of the Espiritismo family, just like Lucumi is a sect of Yoruba and Ifa. And so Mesa Blanca was a pretty prominent practice in Puerto Rico. And this is a way for us to communicate directly with our ancestors and Egun, the dead, the spirits. Spirits are, for me, and again, please, I love the conversation that's happening on the thread. I'm like reading and engaging with a lot of it. Our dead are our most direct contacts and guides on this plane. And when we think we're receiving messaging from our intuition, a lot of times it's the spirits that are around us. So our communication with the dead and with the ancestors around us allows us to continue to have messaging that keep us safe, that keep us on our path, because we don't bother Orisha if we have not worked with the dead first, right? We don't go to Orisha first. We work with our spirits, and our spirits are the closest thing to us for direct messaging. Now, if we think about how we're moving in the world, they are also the most recently transitioned. They offer so much wisdom, so much guidance, and you can get in one misa can answer maybe 7 years worth of therapy that it would take a lifetime of therapy that you can get into 1 or 2 misas, because the spirit will tell you the truth. And some spirits lie. They're people. They have their human characteristics, but Espiritismo is so important when we're working with Lucumi, because we evolve our mediumship, we evolve our third eye, we evolve our intuition, we evolve our ritual work to honor the dead, so that way we practice that, and then we can go on to the ritual work that involves Orisha, because those things you cannot mess up. Ancestors are much more forgiving because they're people, they're humans.
No, thank you for that. And that really goes into something you said earlier about methodology and about the science, right? And there are actual systems in place in order to communicate with the dead, right? And that there's a process and procedure, right? I get from a lot of folks questions and throughout my life about, I want to communicate with this Orisha or that Orisha, and they haven't done any commitment or ceremony or rite, right? In order to do that. Not to say, again, like I said earlier, they live in nature. I mean, they're manifestations of God, and before civilization as we have constructed it, with concrete and highways existed, I mean, you have the natural world, and that's where they live. So of course, anyone can communicate with the Orisha, but the correct way, the proper way, is to go to your ancestors first and build that relationship, right? So for you, as someone who's gone through those processes and procedures and methodologies, how have the ancestors and your ancestors helped you?
I struggle with this. Quincy knows. Quincy is my elder, and Quincy has seen me, in practice being like, I can't hear nothing. I can't do anything. But the practice of working with my Egun has brought to me stillness, the practice of stillness and diligence and prayer. I've never prayed as hard as I pray in working with my Egun and my ancestors as I do now in this religion, and I feel very comforted by it. I will say, my mother transitioned 4 years ago, and she suffered with a very challenging mental wellness. She had an autoimmune deficiency, and she was my best friend. And we had gone through 3 or 4 lifetimes together, and I was lost. I went into this religion wanting to gain some mystical, magical power in order to hear her and feel her. And what I was told is like, first of all, she's not even going to talk to you for a year. And secondly, you have to practice. And as an ancestor, my mother has been opening more doors for me than she could have ever done in this physical world where capitalism and patriarchy have all these barriers. Those ancestors are free, and they are powerful, and they love to be acknowledged. And the more we talk to them as if they're here, the less I feel the loss and the overwhelming pain of grief. I feel closer to everyone that I've lost.
Thank you for sharing that. And this is extra question because I sent the questions beforehand, but this is
Mhm.
part of the theme of the conversation right now. I have friends and acquaintances, and I see online who are this embrace, especially with this generation, right? I'm glad
Yes.
Omar said I was young, but I'm 35, I'm not that young. Pero there's folks like I'm seeing folks in their 20s and their teens, and I'm loving it. Boricuas, other Latinx folks who are returning to their indigenous practices of their families, right? But I also see, like I mentioned, my friends and acquaintances, this conversation about which ancestors to revere, right? Especially the ones who are gaining a political consciousness and want to focus on their Afro ancestors and ignore the European ancestors or ignore other ancestors, because we all literally have thousands upon thousands of ancestors. So what do you say to those who like, well, I only want to work with these particular ancestors. I don't really want to invoke other ancestors or communicate with them. Like, what do you say to
Go ahead, Quincy.
Throw it on me. So yeah, espiritismo is about giving light to one's spiritual guides that are around them. And so there are some spirits who are a little bit more endurecidos. They're a little bit like hard in their nature. And so and they need a lot more work, as if they needed it when they were alive. That's um you know we go through a lot of things or whatever, either being conditioned by society or by our immediate inner circles or whatever, that make us kind of like that make some people need a lot more work than others. People when they die, they go with the same, you know traumas and stuff that they had from when they were living here on earth. And so um you know it's kind of hard to pick and choose, and say that I'm gonna work with this grandmother, but this grandmother was super mean. So no, like I give all of my ancestors and my spirit guides light, and love, and prayer, and you know so that they can be elevated, so that they can transcend into different ways of thinking.
Thank you.
Yeah, and part of that is you can't pick and choose that. Some ancestors will walk with, and they come from all different sects of the world. So we use a bóveda. A bóveda is a spiritual arc that acknowledges all kinds of ancestors that might walk with you, right? And so you have your ancestors, your family ancestors. You have you honor your siete potencias, and then you honor the Arabes, the Asians, the Indios, the Gypsies, the religious, and it could go on and on. There are so many subcategories, but your bóveda is there, and that's what you should be. Anybody could have a bóveda. You don't need to be initiated to really honor those ancestors. You could use your bóveda and honor them, and receive messaging through that. A part of this is that we are recycled souls. We come from many versions of ourselves. And so I love the movie Soul. I promised myself I wouldn't mention it, but
How
I
much they
just feel
paying
like
you?
Soul is telling all the secrets, and that we have mentors that are assigned to us. They come down, they protect us, and I can't choose that. But you know what? Some of them were very specific to my personality. The reason why I go into the kitchen and I want to work with herbs, it's because of this person. The reason why I'm a solo artist, not just an actor. I'm a solo artist. It's specifically to another spirit that I have. The reason why, like, I love babies and I'm a nurturer, that's another. Our personalities can be influenced by so many different spirits. So we don't pick and choose them, but it's very surprising who might be on your team. What an amazing concept to have a corillo of spirits that make up all of your protection, your personality, your guides, your influences, and it's powerful. And I think that helps us now try not to hold so many barriers racially or ethnically, because Vikings were powerful spirits, powerful people, you know, and they were part of, you know, mathematicians and geologists and astrologers, and they were very powerful. Like white witches are strong, you know, and I think that helps us unify in a way that's less divisive. We understand that many people come from power, and once we start to oppress and think that we can overpower one or the other, that is a human thing. That is a man-made thing. That is not of light. That is not of God. That is very much moving away from that. And so I think that when we acknowledge that everybody here comes from a lineage that were powerful, indigenous, and decolonized, then we could really start to empower ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. And what I hear, which forever gets me, I mean, that's why I'm invested in this religion and these traditions, is that so many things can exist side by side, right? Preservation and transformation, right? Affirmation of our Blackness and the source of Africa of these traditions, while also an openness to accept the plenitude of humanity into these traditions, right? So these things can exist side by side. It's not rigid, right? There's a place for everything. And one of the things that are connected to that is the issue of queerness, of being gay, lesbian, trans, intersex, LGBTQAI. I see, you know, anyone who knows anybody in these traditions in Lucumi knows that there's a lot of queer folks. And why is that? Is a question that's important to ask. And so I want to ask, by why do you think there are so many queer folks in Lucumi, and feel, do they feel accepted? I'm queer, so like, exactly how did that come to be, and what does the theology say?
Yeah.
I think everybody on the panel here.
We all queer, right? Yeah, we all queer.
Me sacaron del closet si no sabían.
I know.
No, I'm
I
joking.
just said myself, but I was like, if you quieren salir del closet ustedes, that's good. Okay,
I
we
know.
all queer.
Sabi's be like, by the way, now.
That's a good question. But I see parallels to, well, before I say that, queer people are just like any other people. Like, everybody wants community. Everybody wants to feel like they belong to something. And so, just feeling like you belong somewhere is very golden. Like, I don't know, like when you were talking, I was thinking about the ballroom scenes and how people form communities when they were feeling kind of like marginally like oppressed, and they form communities in these houses. And so I see that within Lucumi as well. There are some houses that I don't know, like queer people just tend to look for a community where they feel that they won't be judged or shamed, where they can fit in without being asked a lot of ignorant questions. Yeah, that's just the bottom line. People want community. People want to feel embraced.
And perdón.
Well, I was just gonna piggyback on that. On top of feeling not judged, and also honoring that a lot of indigenous people practice or acknowledge two-spirit people. I think that part of what we see in certain houses or in even the religion is that while it's based within Cuba and the islands and in our particular Latinidad, in the formation it is, we have a very strong presence of patriarchy. And the alignment of the religion and culture has combined in ways that are not written. Just like in Christianity, it is not written anywhere that homophobia is a sin. It's not written anywhere, right? I believe that what I have seen and learned so far is that there is an embeddedness in our culture and our practice that allows patriarchy to reveal itself in certain ways. But the houses that are truly traditional, they say it's not written. Do no harm. Have no sin in your heart, seek not to oppress others. Those are the main guides and principles that truly, like, Ifa, Lucumi, all of these religions that we practice tend to support. So if certain people find that their homes are oppressive or judgmental, that their madrina or padrino is being abusive or judgmental, that's just not the home for you, right?
Yeah.
You can keep looking, and with permission, always with permission and going through the right channels, you can find the home that you feel safe and feeling your most whole and happy self. You know?
And thank you for that, because again, like you said perfectly, we live in a patriarchal world, and that affects that poisons everything. And while the theology I'm hearing is not anything anti-LGBTQAI, homophobia and transphobia and sexism still exist in particular houses. So like you said, and that house is not for you, because there are houses of full acceptance, because the Orisha do not care about your sexuality.
And the ironic part is that like the fundamental pillars of the Lucumi faith were all women. You know, there were women that were preserving this. So whatever. The first Oriate was Octavio Sama, Obadimei, but he was trained by a woman. And so, you know, patriarchy over the course of maybe over 150 years later kind of like injected itself into Lucumi, and then you started seeing these power struggles.
Thank you.
So this has been so enlightening for me. I can't even start. It's and the conversation's going. Like there's a lot of people. I know you guys can't see it.
The threads, I'm seeing the threads.
Yeah, Melissa. She's even commenting, so she's a great multitasker. But thank you for engaging. And I wanted to mention some of the things that people are saying. Okay, Iris Diaz asked a very simple question that seems to be in everybody's mind: is where should I begin? What is fundamental? If I'm being, drawn to this, where should I start?
That's a great question.
Great question. Yeah. So yeah, I would find an elder in the religion, find somebody who is initiated. And so I've seen a lot of Facebook videos of people who are addressing this topic. Find somebody who's reputable, like my Orisha name, my Ocha name from initiation is Ewin Saleh. My godmother is Ocha B. My Yubona, her Ocha name is Echui Bulade. I did Cariocha in Havana, Cuba, in 2009, in the house of Nelson Monteagudo, Ibay Maintonu. Unfortunately, he passed away. I have no problem sharing my lineage to people. I've met people on the streets. I met this one person when I was a Yawo. She was like, "Oh, I have Santo made. I have Chango made." I was like, "Okay, that's cool." Or no, she didn't tell me who she had made. She just said, "I had Ocha made." I was like, "Okay, who's your guardian Orisha?" She was like, "Oh, my godmother told me I shouldn't tell you." And I'm like, "Okay, well, normally it's protocol for a Yawo to throw themselves to prostrate on the ground so that we can get picked up by the elders, hands or whatever." And I'm like, "Well, if I don't know who's crowned on your head, I'm not gonna throw myself to some mystery whatever Mickey Mouse that they put on there." So finding somebody who's reputable is the first step, and then letting them guide you per their house's protocols, getting to know getting to know your spiritual guides should be the very first thing, honestly. And then I feel that they will take the wheel, and then they'll steer you into the path of somebody who you should be with.
I'm sorry, Elisa, you wanted to comment on that?
No, I was just gonna echo, starting there, and also you could be anybody who's wanting to start first in your community. I also know that Leo Negron Rodriguez on the thread is also he's sharing places in the community where you can go and start and just be in community, and then
that was my next comment.
Yeah. So the community, again, we have so many practitioners that are in this Chicago community, but the thread is national, right? The thread is national. So even not specific to Chicago, there are a lot of resources happening in this thread right now that you can follow on Facebook and start getting connected to community, and the community is going to lead you to a house. And I think we should also not feel pressured to have one specific thing. You can visit houses until you feel at home, and then make that commitment with your padrino madrina. That is a lifelong commitment. Why wouldn't you date, before you get married?
That's
you
so
know,
true.
yeah, please continue to just be involved in the community. Go to events, see how they're doing, how they're teaching, how they're engaging, how they're learning. Also, if you go to a house and you don't feel like you can learn there, that's also a big sign, because
Yeah.
you're gonna need to learn. If there are no books around, that's a big red flag. My ile has a library in there, and it's open to all of us. So just continue to be involved. Start getting involved first before you go through anything.
And I just want to add very,
Yeah,
very
go ahead.
quickly. Cógelo con tequerisi, de verdad, because
Yeah.
for me it's a 10-year journey towards making ocha, which I hopefully we make un ocha. And I started out just engaging with my ancestors for years, and especially I was moving around different parts of the U.S. I lived in New York and Texas, so I was away from my ile, but I always returned for my padrino's ocha birthday and to see my grandparents, of course. And so, like, suavecito. Unless your life isn't in danger, like suavecito, work with your ancestors first, and they will get you all the paths open and bring you the right people.
I love the conversation because even though it assumes it doesn't I think that obviously there's gonna be a vocabulary that somebody that's not involved is not gonna recognize immediately. But I think that it leaves the curiosity there, and the conversation has been so engaging that you feel like you start understanding as we progress in the conversation. So I wanted to also shout out to Leo Negron, because he's been commenting, and he, of course, is somebody that we respect a lot, and that is a huge part of this community here at Ruiz Belvis, and of course with Africaribe, and through the music we know him from so many things. He pointed out of a resource of Olosha's United Chicago. So if you want to check that out, he wanted to refer, because they have some books that are really good. So for people that are curious and want to learn more, connect with Leo Negron. He's very available, and he obviously knows a lot about the subject and can connect you with people. And just in general, the conversation has been amazing. There's a lot of other subjects, and people Janira Delgado put a comment because there were some questions about voodoo, and voodoo is the religion. She mentioned, this is what she's saying, Janira Delgado, voodoo is the religion practiced in New Orleans by American popular culture. I would say there are some similar aspects, although there are notable differences.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what could you expand on that? Because there's a lot of mischaracterizations around voodoo, and I would love to hear more about that.
Absolutely.
Sure. Yeah. So, like Xavier was talking about earlier, the migration has always been constant, and so like when Haiti, when they were starting the revolution in Haiti, some of the slave masters saw what was going on. Napoleon had just purchased Louisiana, and so a lot of those Haitian people, took what they had, which was their religion, to New Orleans, and there it kind of went through some type of amalgamation with the people that were there. So with African American folk magic, also with Catholicism, also with indigenous people of that region. Also, you had the Acadians or the Cajuns, who moved from Nova Scotia, to this new land also. And so it's like hoodoo and voodoo, what voodoo of what North Americans know in Louisiana is amalgamation of all of these kind of beliefs together. It's definitely different than voodoo as practiced in Haiti and Dominican Republic. But yeah, it's there's so much to talk about on those two. It's like a completely different. We probably need another hour.
No, for real. I mean, we're too. The way I see it, unfortunately, we are educated in this country to believe that everyone's identity and culture is flat, right? In Puerto Rico, there's one culture, y ya. In Dominican Republic, there's one culture, y ya. In the U.S., there's one American culture, y ya. And I think we have to start looking at the world and every nation and every community and every culture in the world as multilingual, cultural, multi-ethnic, with diverse histories. Because mixing of these identities and cultures and spiritualities, that's been a process as human beings have existed on this planet and encountered other peoples who developed their cultural identities in the context that they're in. And the Caribbean is known as the encounter point of the world because obviously of like colonization and European genocide. But you had this encounter of Europeans, and again, we say just Spanish, but it was multiple ethnic groups and linguistic groups that are from the place now we call Spain, who then arrive into the Caribbean, and you have multiple cultural groups there. We just call them Taino or Arawak, but we don't really know as much as like we could have if things have been preserved in a particular way. And of course, like Africa is a continent with literally hundreds of millions of people, and there's so many different cultural identities and religions. So the Caribbean became this from a place of horror became this focal point of multiple connections. And as Balino mentioned, I mean, that carried through multiple spaces in this country, but that same dynamic happened in this country. I mean, you can look at Black peoples throughout this hemisphere, from all the way from the Arctic down to Patagonia, or even lower, actually, near Antarctica, and wherever Black people live, they have preserved particular elements of their ancestors. And again, their ancestors may be from multiple ethnic groups from Africa who encountered. Like I said earlier, I think, and I believe that Afro-Boricuas in particular, because we preserve many things in Puerto Rico también, but what we saw, what was preserved in Cuba, was a missing puzzle piece. That's why I think so many Black peoples throughout this hemisphere, when they encounter Lucumi in particular, they're like, oh, okay, like this reminds me of some of the practices from my ethnic group and from my grandparents. But for whatever reason, based on the histories of that context, it wasn't the whole system, the methodology, as you mentioned, Melissa, the science wasn't preserved. But I think when we see Lucumi, when I saw Lucumi, I was like, this makes sense because I grew up with Ismael Rivera and I grew up hearing Ekwahe. I grew up hearing all these things. So for people to say these things didn't exist in Puerto Rico organically, there just isn't enough research. And this is my encouragement to those who are scholars, whether official or not, but those who are scholars, to do more research, because in Puerto Rico, I think the more that we uncover, the more we'll discover. And also, again, like it's also important to know Lucumi is Lucumi. Voodoo is voodoo. Candomblé has many nación that relates to many different ethnic groups that encountered themselves in Brazil, encountered with each other in Brazil. But it's important to note, like, if you ever have someone, again, like I mentioned, charlatanes, if someone says like, oh, you know, like this is a mix of everything, that there, again, like we talked about, there's transformations, there's preservations, but each place has its own place. So these are different religions.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it gets so stigmatized, Savi, is because there's so much, not misinformation, but there's so much that is not, you know, we're not in a monolith either. Like there's a lot of nuance, but because Cuba was very close to us, it's inaccessible to a lot of people. And so much of what people see is only expressed through media interpretations, old stories, stigmatized family experiences. So because it's so inaccessible, and for good reason, right? There were reasons why it was protected. There was reasons why it was not practiced openly, and still continues to be guarded, not exclusive, but protected in that sense. And that's why there's still so much stigma around it, because you only see Black people practicing it. And then why would you want Black people to feel empowered? Why would you want them to continue to? Voodoo has such a, for the Haitian, from the Haitian perspective in New Orleans, voodoo was very much outlawed and prohibited because Black people who were practicing an African religion was using it to protect themselves by making their slave owners sick, and out of protection, out of defense. And so through history, anything associated with Black and Blackness and African religion then becomes outlawed and destigmatized. And then we have to draw it back, and we forget we start to continue to adapt and adopt without it, and we go further and further away. And so, part of this this idea that there's only one Santeria and it's voodoo, it's because of the way that we've been seeing it. It's because of the way that it's been embedded into and particularly the United States to be stigmatized, is because it was utilized in ways that were, offensive to white people.
Yeah.
There's a lot of commenting, and there's also just a great conversation happening in general. But I wanted to address something, is that we're doing this in English, and we have a lot of people from Puerto Rico, and they're asking, is this gonna be available in Spanish and all those things. Así que a los boricuas o a cualquier persona que esté escuchando cuyo idioma sea el español, nosotros, ya que vemos que hay bastante interés en esto, pues nos gustaría hacer un evento separado donde tal vez se haga en español. Y también hay una oportunidad tal vez de ponerle subtítulos a esto. O sea que yo me ofrezco, aunque no sea inmediatamente, pero sí poder tener una versión de esto donde gente que hable español pues pueda obviamente participar. Importante que este fuera en inglés por muchas razones. Pensamos que era de primera intención importante llegar al más público posible, y sí vemos una necesidad de información en inglés sobre el tema. Entonces, por esa razón, escogimos esto de hacerlo en inglés, pero todos nuestros panelistas son bilingües. Así que pueden perfectamente hacerle el acercamiento en sus páginas personales. Yo creo que eso sería una buena idea. Y quería dedicarle este momentito a nuestra gente latina y que habla español, que tal vez no pensaba que podía participar tanto. Si tienen alguna pregunta que quieran tirar ahora mismo en español, se la contestamos en español con mucho gusto también, ¿ok?
Claro.
Y quería aprovechar también, ya que tenemos el momento y ya estamos llegando al final, yo voy a dejar que ustedes cierren con unos pensamientos y voy a dejar que Xavi lleve esa parte, ¿no? De darle una oportunidad de cada uno diga un pensamiento final. Pero antes de eso quería invitarlos a que sigan apoyando a Segundo Ruiz Belvis y que podamos tener estas conversaciones más a menudo. Si hay algo que me llena mucho, es de que gente que ha sido parte de la comunidad de Ruiz Belvis por mucho tiempo, y también oportunidades de trabajar con gente nueva que está haciendo trabajos súper interesantes en lo que son los estudios y el abordar los temas afropuertorriqueños. So I wanted to say that I'm very pleased that this conversation has happened, that we have such a great panel of people that belong to the SRBCC community, that also have participated in many events. We have artists that, like, of course, in the case of Quincy, resident artists with Los Pleneros de Don Segundo, which is a group that was born here at Segundo Ruiz Belvis. And he has always had, just like he has connections with all the other great cultural centers and music groups here in Chicago. So I felt that this was gonna be a great opportunity to highlight people that are very open about this subject, but are also people that really know the tradition and respect the tradition, and they have different experiences. So I think that they made the conversation even more accessible because they come from different backgrounds and experiences. I also want to invite you, we have just like 10 opportunities or 10 spaces for tomorrow's Afro-Boricua cooking class. It's called Quimbombo a lo Criollo. And this is going to be with Chef Roberto Perez from Urban Pilon. So we have only 10 spots available. Facebook erroneously says 32 spots available, but I can't change it for some reason. So if you guys
change it.
Yeah, well, you know what? If it fills up, it fills up, and I'll just take down the event or something when we can't take more people. But yeah, the thing is that with Eventbrite, some people signed up through Eventbrite and others through Facebook, and it created this situation where Facebook won't let me edit that number. So anyway, if you want to join the cooking class, it's going to be tomorrow, a broadcast live here from Segundo Ruiz Belvis, and we are going to use a private Zoom link. We're asking a $15 donation to participate in this great class. We also want to highlight that this is a celebration not only of the abolition of slavery in Puerto Rico, which has been a tradition of Segundo Ruiz Belvis Cultural Center, but also this is a celebration or the beginning of a year-long celebration of the 50 years of Segundo Ruiz Belvis Cultural Center. So be on the lookout because we're about to announce a lot of great things. We have an incredible dance residency in partnership with the Dance Makers Forum and our own Chicago-owned, Humboldt Park-owned Ibeliz Diaz is going to be working on her craft, her dance craft here in this space, and we're going to be able to document it. But it's a residency in which she really can take over and explore all the things in dance that she has wanted to explore, but maybe hasn't had the time or resources to do. So we're also going to be hiring technicians and people that work in the industry to help her in this process. So we're very thankful that we're one of 6 organizations in Chicago that are going to be having these citywide residencies. So be on the lookout for that. We also have a great exchange program where we have Manche Plátano, a group from Spain that does an all-women Afro-Puerto Rican group that, thanks to a grant through the MacArthur International Connections Fund, we're going to have here in Chicago. And our very own Bomba con Bulla, the great Bomba group from Chicago, is going to be able to travel to Spain because finally we can make plans and this pandemic is finally ending. So we're very excited about that. Those are only some of the highlights of the year that's coming for Segundo Ruiz Belvis. And I want to take this opportunity with such a great audience to let you know about what's coming. So I'm going to give it back to the panel. Xavi, thank you so much for taking on this very difficult and important job of being the moderator. And of course, Quincy, you know, I love you like a brother. And Melissa, thank you, because not only were you available, you are in your birthday celebration. And I don't know if it was today, but I know you're celebrating your birthday because you're a March birthday like me. So I want to say happy birthday and thank you for joining us from, I think you're in Vegas right now, right? Is that correct?
Yes, I am.
Oh my God. So yeah, we get fancy. We connect you from Vegas. Happy birthday. Thank you for joining us. And then I'm going to give it back to Xavi. Thank you.
Thank you. Happy birthday, Melissa.
Yeah.
You're an Aries? Or Pisces? You're an Aries or Pisces?
I'm on the cusp, baby.
Okay.
I'm 11 degrees in Aries, but my birthday was the 20th. And I took my grandmother to the final resting spot where I took my mother's ashes at the Grand Canyon, and she didn't get to see it. So we made a very beautiful trip and talk about ancestors, you know, talk about the power of ancestors. My mother was with us the whole way.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, like the last words I have, the last comments, and then obviously like to you, Paulino, as well as Melissa. I am forever grateful that Segundo Ruiz Belvis allowed for this conversation to happen, help facilitate this conversation, provide the resources, like this beautiful space for this conversation to happen. So gracias, Omar. Gracias to Brenda Torres, who was a board member of Segundo Ruiz Belvis and an incredible artist and educator in the community. Also, I want to say hi to my mother. My mother actually invited me to this event on Facebook. I don't think Mommy knew that I was moderating. So my mother, you know,
mira, un biólogo de Santerismo.
Exacto. But my mother, just like you, Melissa, is a child of El Egua. And so, Mommy, te saludo.
Why you out so?
I'm sorry. Pero saludos a Mami en Nueva York. Hijo de Legua. And so again, I think these conversations are extremely important. I hope they continue not only here in this space, but throughout Chicago's Puerto Rican communities, throughout the diaspora, in Puerto Rico también, in el Caribe, because these traditions are not going anywhere. Lucumí is not going anywhere. It has survived thousands of years. I mean, we highlighted I mean, our direct relationship to the transatlantic genocide. But again, there's always been conflict in Africa too. And so these traditions have survived war and famine, and political debates and forced migration and exile. So they're not going anywhere. So what we can do as a community of both devotees and people who are not devotees is to better understand these traditions and better understand the communities and peoples who are preserving this, and not to stigmatize that, not to dehumanize that. Like I said earlier, black is not equated with goodness and God, but it is. And that's why we call this Negro Divino, because black peoples have created and transformed cultures for thousands of years and continue to do that. And actually, in the reality, is that Puerto Rican culture at its base is black culture. And that is also of the Caribbean, and that is the experience of our peoples in Chicago. So I encourage people to do more research. I encourage people to understand. I encourage people to see the other side of these traditions, and not the one that's portrayed in media or portrayed in the racist lens in the educational system. Learn, transform, engage, understand, and thank you for taking this time to be a part of that process.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Also, I want to give my thanks to Segundo Ruiz Belvis Cultural Center, for their continued support, of local artists and of me, having me being on board on so many different projects here. To piggyback on what Savi was saying, I think cultural comprehension of other different people's stories. It's kind of like the glue that brings everything together to make a more full, comprehensive picture. When we omit certain stories, I feel that erasure is big, and it happens a lot. I've seen it within many different spaces, including capoeira, which is Afro-Brazilian martial art that I do. I've met people that don't want to talk about the history, about struggles or slavery or whatever, because it makes them feel bad. Uh, but that's the interesting thing. It's in all the songs that we sing within capoeira and also within the popular samba. You can see it, reflected there, like with salsa. There's little elements there or whatever, but like I just invite everybody to dig a little bit deeper, and be receptive to having these conversations with people about their experiences of older ways of faith or ways of life that we live and practice, to, I don't know, just be a more friendly neighbor.
Yes, Ajay. Also expressing my deepest gratitudes for inviting me to this table. I am a student, and so many times when we have panels, we have a panel of experts. I am an expert in just my experience of being a student. I am a baby in this, so thank you for inviting me as a person who was very much like a lot of the people on the thread who are interested and curious and was leading with a longing. I'm an expert in loss and I'm an expert in grief. And I think that this religion has really helped me find a path of healing that is meant for everyone. This is meant for everyone. And that's why I think the Good Grief Project is so important. What I do with the Good Grief Project is I highlight multidisciplinary healers, and a lot of them are practitioners of African-based religion, African-based healing, and decolonized healing. So I think that this is absolutely meant for everyone. Everyone can find a particular kind of home here with this. So I'm so grateful that this was offered to me. I'm so grateful to speak on it. And as an artist, I'm a playwright, I'm an actor, I'm a stand-up comic. I have truly benefited from having a practice that has allowed me to look at life in different ways. And I think that I know that one of my biggest commitment as an artist and as a practitioner in this religion is to shine a light on this work, not revealing a veil, but actually combating the stigma that has been introduced to a common knowledge and experience through media, through art, through film, and through theater. I will be world premiering my play Brujaha with Urban Theater Company later this year, and it continues to just highlight what a and humanize our experiences. I think it's important for us to start to push the envelope a little bit more. We're seeing things in the media like she's got to have it, and you know, we're seeing other projects and shows continue to push a little bit more and peel back the veil and peel back the veil. And I think certain practices should be shown to correct the idea that is already kind of like misinformed. But then, you know, certain things should be kept sacred. And so just navigating the line of what is sacred, what is holy, and what needs to be centered at the forefront for accuracy in our representation. That's one of my goals. So if you see me going out there with some, you know, with some prayers, it's only to continue to lift and center our diaspora, this African-based religion that we benefit from, and to make sure that I am doing my due diligence to honor my ancestors, the orishas, my padrino, my madrino, who they know who they are, my ile, and just to make it proud and to continue to close the circle on the legacy. It's important.
Thank you. Well, thank you. And there's still a pandemic. It's almost over, but I hope you are taking the time to take care of yourselves, to love those who are loving you back. Be safe out there. Get access to a vaccine. If you can, wear your mask. And I give all you watching love and light, and especially always my Puerto Rican people.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you all. Cheers.